and second graders, it's Miss Townhouse. Today we're going to be reading The 100 Dresses by Eleanor Estes. This book was published in 1944. It was a Newbery Honor in 1945, and it still has stood the test of time. The 100 Dresses, right, in this is about a girl named Wanda. She goes to school in Connecticut after moving, right, and the other children, they really do see her as different. And a lot of kids in her class, 2 girls in particular, they're always asking her about her dresses. So take a look at the cover, and what do you think is going to happen in the book, right, based on this cover? So let's take a look. Chapter 1. Today, Monday, Wanda Petronsky was not in her seat. But nobody, not even Peggy and Madeline, the girls who started all the fun, noticed her absence. Usually Wanda sat in the next to the last seat, in the last row in room 13. She sat in the corner of the room where the rough boys who did not make good grades on their report cards sat. The corner of the room where there was most scuffling of feet, most roars of laughter when anything funny was said, and most mud and dirt on the floor. Wanda did not sit there because she was rough and noisy. On the contrary, she was very quiet and rarely said anything at all, and nobody had ever heard her laugh out loud. Sometimes she twisted her mouth into a crooked sort of smile, but that was all. Nobody knew exactly why Wanda sat in that seat, unless it was because she came all the way from Boggin's Height, and her feet were usually caked with dry mud that she picked up coming down the country roads. Maybe the teacher liked to keep all the children who were apt to come in with dirty shoes in one corner of the room. But no one really thought much about Wanda Petronsky once she was in the classroom. The time they thought about her was outside of school hours, at noontime when they were coming back to school, or in the morning early before school began, when groups of 2 or 3 or even more would be talking and laughing on their way to school. Then sometimes they waited for Wanda to have fun with her. The next day, Tuesday, Wanda was not in school either, and nobody noticed her absence again, except the teacher and probably Big Billy Byron, who sat in the seat behind Wanda's and who could now put his long leg around her empty desk, one on each side, and sit there like a frog, to the great entertainment of all in the corner of the room. But on Wednesday, Peggy and Maddie, who sat in the front row along with other children who got good marks and didn't track in a whole lot of mud, did notice that Wanda wasn't there. Peggy was the most popular girl in school. She was pretty, she had pretty clothes, her auburn hair was curly. Maddie was her closest friend. The reason Peggy and Maddie noticed Wanda's absence was because Wanda had made them late to school. They had waited and waited and waited for Wanda to have some fun with her, and she just hadn't come. They kept thinking she'd come any minute. They saw Jack Beggles running to school, his necktie askew and his cap at a precarious tilt. They knew it must be late, for he always managed to slide into his chair exactly when the bell rang, as though he was making a touchdown. Still, they waited 1 more minute and 1 more minute more, hoping she'd come. But finally they had to race off without seeing her. The 2 girls reached their classroom after the doors had been closed. The children were reciting the Gettysburg Address, for that was the way Miss Mason always began the session. Peggy and Maddie slipped into their seats just as the class was saying their last lines. Right? After Peggy and Maddie stopped feeling like intruders in a class that had already begun, they looked across the room and noticed Wanda was not in her seat. Furthermore, her desk was dusty and looked as though she hadn't been there yesterday. Come to think of it, they hadn't seen her. They had waited for her a little while, but had forgotten about her when they reached school. They often waited for Wanda Petronsky to have fun with her. Wanda lived way up on Boggin's Heights, and Boggin's Heights was no place to live. It was a place to go and pick flowers in the summer, but you always held your breath till you got safely past Old Man Svevin's yellow house. People in the town said Old Man Svensson was no good. He didn't work, and worse still, his house and his yard were dirty, with rusty tin cans strewn about, and even an old straw hat. He lived alone with his dog and his cat. No wonder, said the people of the town. Who would live with him? And many stories circulated about him, and the stories were the kind that made people run fast past his house, even in broad daylight, hoping not to see him. Beyond Svenson's, there was a small, scattered frame house, and in one of these, Wanda Petronsky lived with her father and her brother Jake. Wanda Petronsky, most of the children in room 13 didn't have names like that. They had names easy to say, like Thomas, Smith, or Alan. There was one boy named Bounce, Willie Bounce, and people thought that was funny, but not funny in the same way that Petronsky was. Wanda didn't have any friends. She came to school alone and went home alone. She always wore a faded blue dress that didn't hang right. It was clean, but it didn't look as though it had been ironed properly. She didn't have any friends, but a lot of girls talked to her. They waited for her under the maple trees on the corner of Oliver Street, or they surrounded her in the schoolyard as she stood watching some little girls play hopscotch on the worn, hard ground. Wanda, Peggy would say in a most courteous manner, as though she were talking to Miss Mason or the principal. Wanda, she'd say, giving one of her friends a nudge, tell us, how many dresses did you say you had hanging up in your closet? And so this is the point really in the story to think about, is that if you saw someone like Wanda playing alone on the playground, how would you help her? And what would you say to her? Also, be thinking about new vocabulary words that I might have said, and that's something you can contribute to the flip grid at the end of the read aloud. 100, said Wanda. 100, exclaimed all the girls, and the little girls would stop playing hopscotch and listen, shocked. Yes, 100, all lined up, said Wanda. Then her thin lips drew together in silence. What are they like? Are they silk? Asked Peggy. Yes, all silk, all colors. Velvet, too? Yes, velvet. 100 dresses, repeated Wanda, all lined up in my closet. Then they'd let her go, and then before she'd gone very far, they couldn't help bursting into shrieks and peals of laughter. 100 dresses? Obviously, the only dress Wanda had was the blue one she wore every day. So what did she say she had 100 dresses for? What a story! And the girls laughed while Wanda moved over to the sunny place by the ivory-covered brick wall of the school, where she usually stood and waited for the bell to ring. But if the girls had met her at the corner of Oliver Street, they'd carry her along with them for a way, stopping every few feet to ask her more questions. And it wasn't always dresses they talked about. Sometimes it was hats or coats or even shoes. How many shoes did you say you had? 60. 60? You have 60 pairs of shoes? 60 pairs all lined up in my closet. Yesterday you said you had 50. Now I got 60. Cries of exaggerated politeness greeted this. All alike? Said the girls. Oh no, every pair is different. All colors, all lined up. And Wanda would shift her eyes quickly from Peggy to a distant spot, as though she were looking far ahead, but not seeing anything. Right here you can see a picture of Wanda. She's just on the playground alone. Then the outer fringe of the crowd of girls would break away gradually, laughing, and little by little the group would disperse, right? They would just kind of break apart. Peggy, who had thought up this game, and Maddie, her inseparable friend, were always the last to leave. And finally Wanda would move up the street, her eyes dull and her mouth closed tight, hitching her left shoulder every now and then in the funny way she had, finishing the walk to school alone. Peggy was not really cruel. She protected small children from bullies, and she cried for hours if she saw an animal getting mistreated. If anybody had said to her, "Don't you think it's cruel the way that you treat Wanda?" she would have been very surprised. Cruel? What did the girl want to go and say she had 100 dresses for? Anybody could tell that was a lie. Why did she want to lie? I actually have 100 dresses at home. And she wasn't just an ordinary person. Else why would she have a name like that? Anyways, they never made her cry. As for Maddie, this business of asking Wanda every day how many dresses and how many hats and how many this and how many that she had was really bothering her. Maddie was poor herself, right? She usually wore somebody's hand-me-down clothes. Thank goodness she didn't live on Boggins Heights or have a funny name. And her forehead didn't shine the way Wanda's round one did. What did she use on it? That's what all the girls wanted to know. Sometimes when Peggy was asking Wanda those questions in that mock polite voice, Maddie felt embarrassed and studied the marbles in the palm of her hand, rolling them around and saying nothing to herself. Not that she felt sorry for Wanda exactly. She would never have paid any attention to Wanda if Peggy hadn't invented this game about dresses. But suppose Peggy and all the others started in on her next. She wasn't as poor as Wanda, perhaps, right? But she was poor. Of course she would have made more sense to say she had 100 dresses. Still, she would not like them to begin on her. Not at all. Oh dear, she did wish Peggy would stop teasing Wanda Petronsky. Chapter 3. Somehow Maddie could not buckle down to work. She sharpened her pencil, turning it around carefully in the little red sharpener, letting the shavings fall into a neat heap on a piece of scrap paper, and trying not to get any of the dust from the lead on her math. A slight frown puckered her forehead. In the first place, she didn't like being late to school, and in the second place, she kept thinking about Wanda. Somehow Wanda's desk, though empty, seemed to be the only thing she saw when she looked over to that side of the room. How had the 100 Dresses game begun in the first place? She asked herself impatiently. It was hard to remember the time when they hadn't played that game with Wanda. Hard to think all the way back from now, when the 100 Dresses was like the Daily Dozen, to then, when everything seemed much nicer. Oh yes, she remembered. It had begun that day when Cecile first wore her new red dress. Suddenly, the whole scene flashed swiftly and vividly before Maddie's eyes. It was a bright blue day in September. No, it must have been October, because when she and Peggy were coming to school, arms around each other and singing, Peggy had said to her, "You know what? This must be the kind of day they mean when they say October's bright blue weather." Maddie remembered that because afterwards it didn't seem like bright blue weather anymore, although the weather had not changed in the slightest. As they turned from shady Oliver Street into Maple, they both blinked, for now the morning sun shone straight in their eyes. Besides that, bright flashes of color came from a group of half a dozen or more girls across the street. Their sweaters and jackets and dresses, blues and golds and reds, and one crimson in particular, caught the sun's rays. A crisp, fresh wind was blowing, swishing their skirts and blowing their hair in their eyes. The girls were all exclaiming and shouting, and each one was trying to talk louder than the others. Maddie and Peggy joined the group, and the laughing and the talking. "Hi, Peg. Hi, Maddie." They were greeted warmly. "Look at Cecile." What they were all exclaiming about was the dress Cecile had on, a crimson dress with cap and socks to match. It was a bright new dress. It was very pretty. Everyone was admiring it and admiring Cecile, for long, slender Cecile was a toe dancer and wore fancier clothes than most of them, and she had her black satin bag with her precious white satin ballet slippers slung over her shoulders. Today was the day for her dancing lesson. Maddie sat down on the granite curbstone to tie her shoes. She listened happily to what they were saying. They all seemed especially jolly today, probably because it was such a bright day. Everything sparkled. Way down at the end of the street, the sun shimmered and turned to silver. Maddie picked up a piece of broken mirror, flashed a small circle of light edged with rainbow colors onto the houses. And it was then that Wanda had come along with her brother Jake. They didn't often come to school together. Jake had to get to school very early because he helped old Mr. Heaney, the school janitor, with the furnace, or raking up the dry leaves, or other odd jobs before school even opened. Today, he was going to be late. Even Wanda looked pretty in this sunshine, and her pale blue dress looked like a piece of the sky in summer. And that old gray hat she wore, it must have been something Jake had found. Maddie watched them absent-mindedly as she flashed her pieces of mirror at them. And only absent-mindedly she noticed Wanda stop short when they reached the crowd of laughing and shouting girls. "Come on," Maddie heard Jake say. "I gotta hurry. I gotta get the doors open and ring the bell." "Well, you go the rest of the way," said Wanda. "I want you to stay here." Jake shrugged and went up on Maple Street. Wanda slowly approached the group of girls. With each step forward, before she put her foot down, she seemed to hesitate for a long time. She approached the group as a timid animal, ready to run if anything alarmed it. Even so, Wanda's mouth was twisted into the vaguest suggestion of a smile. She must feel happy too, because everybody must feel happy on such a day. As Wanda joined the outside fringe of girls, Maddie stood up too and went over close to Peggy to get a good look at Cecile's new dress herself. She forgot about Wanda, and more girls kept coming up, enlarging the group, and all exclaiming about Cecile's new dress. "Isn't it lovely?" Yeah, I have a new blue dress, but it's not as pretty as that, said another one. My mother just bought me a plaid one of the Stuart plaids. I got a new dress for dancing school. I'm going to make my mother get me a dress just like Cecile's. Right? And that is Cecile's red dress. Everyone was talking to everybody else. Nobody said anything to Wanda, but there she was, part of the crowd. The girls closed in a tighter circle around Cecile, still talking all at once and admiring her, and Wanda was somehow enveloped in the group. Nobody talked to Wanda, but nobody even thought about her being there. Maybe, thought Maddie, remembering what had happened next. Maybe she figured all she'd have to do was say something, and she'd really be one of the girls. And this would be an easy thing to do, because all that they were doing was talking about dresses. Maddie was standing next to Peggy. Wanda was standing next to Peggy on the other side. All of a sudden, Wanda impulsively touched Peggy's arm and said something. Her light blue eyes were shining, and she looked excited like the rest of the girls. What? Asked Peggy, for Wanda had spoken very softly. Wanda hesitated a moment, and then she repeated her words firmly. I have 100 dresses at home. So, we are going to stop there today, and I want you to think about if you think Wanda Petronsky has 100 dresses at home. And why or why not? And why do you think if she doesn't have 100 dresses at home, what is making her say that? Why would she just make that up? And so I will listen and see your responses on the Flipgrid. Thanks so much for now.